Welcome to Daily Stories Number 1, your go-to destination for thought-provoking narratives that delve deep into the complexities of society. Today, we embark on a compelling journey with our new story, Under the Surface, a tale that challenges perceptions and sheds light on the profound issues of racial profiling and justice. On a serene afternoon in Riverside Park, the sun cast a gentle warmth over the sprawling greenery where the distant laughter of children, playing in the rustle of leaves, created a peaceful symphony. Seated on a time-worn bench was Marcus Davis, an FBI agent by profession, who found solace in the pages of his favorite novel. Away from the chaos of his demanding job, Marcus, a man of keen intellect and calm demeanor, enjoyed the anonymity that the park offered. It was one of the few places he could blend into the background and not be defined by his badge, or the expectations that came with it. Today, however, his presence drew the unwarranted attention of Officer Brian Harkens, a seasoned police officer with over 20 years of service under his belt. Officer Harkens, known for his sharp instincts, patrolled the park with a watchful eye. His tenure had ingrained a deep familiarity with the city's rhythms and faces, but the sight of Marcus, an unfamiliar black man sitting alone, triggered a visceral reaction. Something about Marcus's composed appearance stirred a suspicion in Harkens, a suspicion deeply rooted in his experiences in, unbeknownst to him, his biases. Under his breath, Harkens muttered, "Never seen him around here." Before his gaze fixed on Marcus, there had been vague reports of suspicious activities. In the area, nothing concrete, just whispers that were enough to ignite the officer's curiosity. Harkens watched from a distance, trying to piece together a narrative that might explain his gut feeling. Marcus, absorbed in his book, felt the weight of a stare and looked up to find Officer Harkens eyeing him from across the lawn. The familiarity of being scrutinized like this wasn't new to him. His career had often put him in situations where his skin color preceded his identity. However, Marcus knew better than to show discomfort. With a calm resolve, he marked his page, closed his book, and met Harkins' gaze squarely. The officer's hand tightened around his baton. As he observed Marcus's unflappable presence, there was something about the way Marcus returned his stare, confident, unbothered, that unsettled Harkins. "Let's see what this guy's up to." The subtle escalation, based on nothing more than a baseless hunch. But today was different. Marcus wasn't in the mood for confrontation, yet he knew that his reaction could shape the encounter's outcome. As Officer Brian Harkens closed the distance between himself and Marcus Davis, the tension in the air became palpable. Brian's approach was deliberate, his posture rigid with authority. He was a man used to being heated, without question, and Marcus's calm demeanor only fueled his suspicion further. "Good afternoon," Brian said as he reached the bench, his voice carrying a polite edge, but undercut by an unmistakable undertone of scrutiny. "Nice day, isn't it?" Marcus looked up, his expression unreadable. "Afternoon," he replied, his voice even and composed. He made a point of keeping his hands visible, resting on the closed book in his lap, a subtle signal of non-threat. "What brings you out here today?" Brian asked, scanning Marcus's face for any tell that might justify his gut feeling. His eyes flicked to the book, looking for something. "Anything that might hint at wrongdoing." "Just enjoying the park," Marcus answered simply, his tone neutral. "It's a nice day." Brian nodded slowly, his gaze not leaving Marcus. He wasn't convinced. There was something about the man's composure that didn't sit right with him. "You from around here?" he pressed, hoping to catch Marcus off guard. Marcus smiled slightly, the gesture not quite reaching his eyes. "I've been around," he said non-committally. The non-answer made Brian shift his weight, his stance becoming slightly more confrontational. "Mind if I see some ID?" Brian's question hung in the air, more a demand than a request. Marcus's smile faded. This was the point where things could escalate quickly. He knew his rights. He wasn't obligated to show ID, just for sitting in a public park. But he also knew that refusing could make the situation more complicated. "Am I under arrest?" he asked, his tone measured. Brian bristled at the question. That calm defiance was exactly what he found so unsettling. "You will be if you don't cooperate," he retorted, his hand resting on the handle of his baton. As a subtle threat, Marcus took a slow, deep breath, his mind racing. He didn't like where this was heading, but knew he had to maintain his composure. "I'm just sitting in the park," he stated clearly. "Is there a law against that?" Brian's patience was thinning. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," he claimed, though even he knew how weak that sounded. Marcus did not move, his gaze steady and challenging. "And what description is that?" he asked quietly. Brian found himself faltering, his confidence waning. He didn't have a good answer, and deep down he knew it. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped. "Show me some ID now." For a moment the two men locked eyes, the tension thick between them. Marcus knew he could assert his rights, but he also knew that doing so might escalate the situation further. Deciding to diffuse the tension, he slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed his ID to Brian. Brian took the ID with a quick snatch, his eyes scanning the name and photo. It didn't mean anything to him yet, but that didn't matter. He had already decided what his next move would be. "Stand up," he commanded, stepping back to give Marcus space to rise. As Marcus stood complying with the order, he knew the odds were stacked against him, but he also knew who he was, and soon so would Officer Harkens. As Marcus stood up, the reality of the moment weighed heavily on him, yet he maintained his composed exterior. Officer Harkens, clutching Marcus's ID, glanced at it briefly, before motioning him to turn around. "Hands behind your back," he instructed, his tone indicating that he was not up for negotiation. Reluctantly, Marcus complied, feeling the cold metal of the handcuffs click around his wrists. The click resonated more profoundly than just metal. It was a stark reminder of how quickly situations like this could escalate based on misconceptions. "Let's walk," Harkins said, guiding Marcus towards the patrol car park nearby. The walk to the car was short in distance, but long in silence. Marcus's mind raced, not with fear but with a simmering frustration at the injustice of the situation. He knew this was not just about him, but about countless others who faced similar fates. As they reached the patrol car, Brian opened the back door, gesturing for Marcus to get inside. Once Marcus was seated, Brian shut the door with a definitive thud and walked around to the driver's side. Starting the engine, he took one more glance at Marcus through the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. The drive to the precinct was quiet, the usual sounds of the city, muffled by the tension inside the car. Brian's thoughts churned as he processed the situation. He had acted on instinct, but as he stole glances at Marcus's calm demeanor, doubt began to creep in. Had he made a mistake? Upon arrival at the precinct, the atmosphere shifted as they entered. Marcus's posture, straight despite the handcuffs, caught the attention of several officers. Whispers filled the air, a mix of curiosity and surprise. Brian led Marcus to the booking area, where they were met by Captain Laura Bennett. Captain Bennett, with her sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, looked from Brian to Marcus. "Officer Harkens, what's this about?" she asked, her tone demanding an explanation. Brian handed over Marcus's ID and explained. Caught him acting suspicious in the park. He was evasive and refused to cooperate. Bennett took the ID, glanced at it, and her eyes widened slightly as recognition dawned. "Do you know who this is?" she asked Brian, her voice a mix of disbelief and irritation. Brian, confused, shook his head. He had not looked closely at the ID. His assumptions had blinded him to the facts. "This is Marcus Davis, FBI," Bennett announced her statement, echoing around the room. The revelation hit Brian like a wave, the implications of his actions crashing down on him. Then it turned to Marcus, her expression softening. "Mr. Davis, I apologize for this misunderstanding. We'll sort this out immediately." Marcus, still composed, nodded. "Thank you, Captain. I'd appreciate that." Brian watched, a sinking feeling in his stomach, as Bennett motioned for the cuffs to be removed. As the metal was unlocked, Marcus rubbed his wrists, his gaze steady on Brian, who couldn't meet his eyes. The incident sparked a series of discussions within the precinct about procedures, training and biases, Captain Bennett taking the lead. ensured that this moment would serve as a catalyst for reflection and reform. Marcus walked out of the precinct, his shoulders slightly lighter, knowing that while this incident was resolved, the broader fight for justice and understanding continued. As the handcuffs were removed, Marcus rubbed his wrists gently, his gaze lingering on Brian with a look of measured calmness. The air in the booking room felt heavy, charged with a mix of regret and realization. Captain Bennett signaled for both men to follow her into her office for a more private discussion. Once inside the closed quarters of Captain Bennett's office, the atmosphere was solemn. Brian stood, his posture stiff, reflecting the turmoil inside him. He had always prided himself on his instincts, but today those same instincts had failed him, leading to a grave mistake. Captain Bennett began, her voice steady but firm. "Officer Harkens, you acted on a bias today, not on evidence. Your actions could have significantly harmed Mr. Davis's life and career. We need to address this seriously." She then turned to Marcus. "And Mr. Davis, your composure under such provocation is commendable, but I am truly sorry for what occurred." Marcus nodded, appreciating the captain's straightforwardness. "Thank you, Captain. I understand the pressures law enforcement faces, but it's crucial that these pressures don't lead to wrongful profiling and actions." The room fell silent. As the weight of Marcus's words settled over them, Brian, feeling the sting of his actions more acutely, in the quiet, finally spoke. I'm sorry. Mr. Davis, I was wrong and my judgment was clouded. There's no excuse for my actions." Marcus looked at Brian, seeing the genuine remorse in the officer's eyes. "Your apology is accepted, Officer Harkens, but let's ensure this becomes a learning point, not just for you but for the entire force." Captain Bennett agreed. This incident indeed serves as a critical reminder of our duties and the power of our badges. We'll be implementing new training sessions focused on bias recognition and proper response protocols. The discussion then turned to practical steps for institutional change within the precinct. Captain Bennett outlined plans for workshops and invited Marcus to share his experiences and insights. "As part of the training, your input will be invaluable in helping us build a more just and effective force," she said. Brian listened to the earlier defensiveness, giving way to a resolve to learn and improve. The meeting concluded with a handshake between Marcus and Brian, a gesture symbolizing both reconciliation and a mutual commitment to forward progress. As Marcus left the precinct, the earlier events replayed in his mind. He felt a cautious optimism about the potential changes that might come from this unfortunate encounter. It was a reminder of the ongoing challenges and the continuous efforts needed to bridge gaps in understanding and justice within the community. After the meeting with Captain Bennett, Brian Harkens returned to his desk, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him. The room felt smaller, each glance from his colleagues heavier. The words from the meeting echoed in his mind, not just the criticism but also Marcus's offer to turn this into a learning opportunity for everyone. Brian spent the rest of the day going over the new training materials, focused on unbiased policing. They highlighted the importance of recognizing one's own prejudices and the impact those biases could have on their duties. This wasn't just a refresher. It was a complete overhaul of the approach he had learned when he first joined the force. In the weeks that followed, the precinct saw changes that went beyond just Brian and Marcus's interaction. Workshops and seminars became a regular part of the schedule. Officers were encouraged to engage in open discussions about biases with Marcus, often invited to share his perspective and experiences. His insights provided a catalyst for meaningful conversations that challenged many officers to reflect deeply on their practices and attitudes. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to collaborate with law enforcement agencies, using his experience as a foundation for broader discussions on justice and policing. His involvement garnered attention from various civic leaders and even reached national platforms, sparking debates on law enforcement practices across the country. As these discussions gained momentum, they began to influence policy changes at higher levels of government. Legislators and law enforcement officials looked into new policies that mandated regular bias training and established clearer accountability mechanisms for officers' actions. Back at the precinct, Captain Bennett noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The initial resistance to the changes had gradually transformed into a cautious optimism. Officers started to see the benefits of understanding and addressing their biases, which led to better community interactions and an increase in public trust. Months later, Marcus returned to the precinct for a follow-up seminar. He noticed new faces among the officers, younger ones who had come into the force. Aware of the ongoing reforms, his talks now included examples of positive outcomes from the changes within this very precinct, showcasing a path forward that others could emulate. The seminar ended with a Q&A session, where officers, both old and new, expressed their thoughts and asked questions about continuing the momentum of change. Marcus answered each question thoughtfully, emphasizing the importance of continual self-assessment and community engagement. As he left the precinct that day, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment, but knew the journey was far from over. The fight for a just and unbiased policing system would require ongoing effort and commitment from everyone involved. This story, of a single encounter that sparked significant changes, serves as a reminder that transformation within law enforcement starts with the courage to confront uncomfortable truths and the determination to make lasting changes, not just for oneself but for the entire community. Several months after the transformative seminar, the ripple effects of the precinct's new initiatives were palpable within the community. Marcus Davis had become a figure not only respected within law enforcement circles, but also cherished in the broader community for his advocacy and commitment to change. With Captain Bennett's support, Marcus launched a series of community outreach programs. These programs were designed not only to educate the public about the reforms, but also to gather feedback and foster a dialogue between residents and police officers. The objective was clear: to build a foundation of trust and cooperation that had been eroded over the years. One of the most impactful programs was the Community Policing Partnership, which paired police officers with community leaders in joint efforts to address local issues. This initiative allowed residents to see officers in a new light, not as enforcers, but as partners in community development. At one of the community forums, Marcus spoke passionately about the need for continued engagement. True change comes not from policy alone, but from the hearts and minds of the people it serves. Each conversation, each program we introduce, serves to bridge the divide that has grown over time. The forum was well attended, with many residents expressing their previously unvoiced concerns and desires for the future of their neighborhood. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with many highlighting the visible changes in police behavior and a new sense of security and belonging. Encouraged by the success of these initiatives, other precincts began to adopt similar strategies. The model of open dialogue and partnership, set by Marcus and Captain Bennett, started to inspire departments across the state and eventually the nation. 1 year after the incident that had almost derailed his career, Marcus was invited to speak at a national conference on policing reform. He shared his experiences and the successful strategies implemented in his precinct, which had led to a significant decrease in community complaints and an increase in crime-solving rates through cooperative community efforts. During his speech, Marcus emphasized, "Our work is far from over. Every step forward is a step towards a system that respects and protects all of its citizens equally. It's about consistency, persistence, and genuine efforts to understand and address the concerns of those we serve." As the conference concluded, many attendees approached Marcus, eager to learn more about implementing similar changes in their own regions. It was clear that the work done at Marcus's precinct was setting a new standard for community policing across the country. Back in his community, Marcus continued his outreach, knowing that every small interaction contributed to the larger goal of transformation. He often reflected on the journey, from the tense encounter with Officer Harkens to becoming a national advocate for change, realizing that every challenge faced was an opportunity to teach and learn. Through the story of Marcus and Officer Harkens, we learned that understanding and respect are crucial foundations for building a strong and fair community. This narrative is not only a lesson about the dangers of bias and premature judgment, but also a testament to the power of forgiveness and positive change. It is essential for all of us, whether citizens or law enforcement, to continuously introspect and strive, to learn and improve, not just to change ourselves, but also to contribute to societal transformation. If you found value in this story, please hit like and subscribe to ensure you don't miss more inspiring stories from our channel Daily Stories. Not a one, share this story to extend its positive impact, and leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts on these issues. Together we can build a stronger, more empathetic and just community